It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Megan had just gotten back from a business trip that morning. She was distracted, a little more distant than usual, but nothing too out of the ordinary. We were having lunch when she casually mentioned, "Hey Brad, there's something wrong with the car. It's making a strange noise when I hit the brakes. Can you take a look?" Of course, I agreed. I'd been fixing cars my whole life. What kind of husband wouldn't check his wife's car when she asked? I owned a small service station on the edge of town, a place I'd spent the last 15 years building with my own two hands. Megan, my wife, worked in marketing and traveled a lot for her job, but I never thought much of it. After lunch, I took her car and drove to my service station. I got down to work, expecting something minor, a loose pad or maybe some wear on the brake line. It was routine, something I could fix in my sleep. And it was just that, a simple fix. I tightened a bolt, checked the pads, and everything seemed fine. Easy. But as I was about to wrap up, I figured I'd do her one better. The inside of the car was a bit of a mess from all her traveling, so I thought I'd vacuum it out, make it nice for her. Megan was always on the go. It was the least I could do. That's when I found it. At first, it was nothing. I had the vacuum running under the passenger seat when something got caught in the hose. I turned the machine off, expecting to pull out a crumpled receipt or some loose change. Instead, my fingers closed around something small, rubbery, and unmistakably vile. A used condom. My heart stopped. I held it in my hand, staring at it like it was some alien object, like it couldn't possibly be what I thought it was. There had to be some other explanation. There had to be. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it wasn't hers. My mind raced, trying to grasp at any alternative, any reason that wasn't the obvious one. But deep down, I knew. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me with the truth I didn't want to admit. Megan, my Megan, the woman I had loved for over a decade, was cheating on me. The condom was proof, dirty, and undeniable. I dropped it into the trash, my hand shaking. If she was cheating, I needed to be sure. I needed more proof. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. How could she sleep so easily? How could she lie next to me, kiss me, and pretend like everything was fine when there was another man touching her? My stomach turned with the thought, a cold knot of anger and disbelief twisting inside me. But I couldn't act on rage. If she was having an affair, I needed to know how long it had been going on, who it was with, how far it had gone. Was it just once? Was it something casual? Or had she been leading a double life right under my nose? I had to know. So I started small. The next day, while Megan was in the shower, I checked her bank statements. It wasn't hard. We shared most of our accounts. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I wouldn't find anything out of the ordinary. But then the charges started jumping out at me. Dinner at a high-end restaurant I'd never heard of, hundreds of dollars dropped in a single night. A spa retreat for two. Not one, two. Another charge for a couple's massage. The dates matched her business trips perfectly. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Megan was cheating on me, and it wasn't just some one-time fling. She had been doing this for months, maybe longer, spending our money on romantic dinners and luxurious retreats with someone else. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady myself. My world was unraveling, but I couldn't let her see it. I closed the laptop and shoved the papers back into place, my heart pounding in my chest. Confronting her wasn't enough. If Megan was lying to me about this, I needed every piece of proof I could get before I confronted her. She was smart, devious, even, and I couldn't afford to be careless. No, I had to play this carefully or I could lose everything. Later that day, while Megan was out running errands, I grabbed my phone and looked up a local private investigator. I didn't know where else to turn. I wasn't about to follow her around town like some paranoid fool. I needed someone who could dig up the facts and give me the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A name caught my eye, Greg Peterson, Private Investigations. The reviews were solid, and he seemed to have experience with cases like mine. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. It felt so surreal, like I was stepping into a part of life I'd never imagined for myself. But I couldn't go back now. I pressed the button, and the line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Peterson Investigations. I cleared my throat, my voice coming out more strained than I'd hoped. Hi, I need some help. It's about my wife. I think she's cheating on me. There was a pause on the other end. I see. Can you meet in person to discuss the details? I agreed, and we set up a meeting for later that afternoon at a small coffee shop just outside of town. As I sat there, waiting for Greg to arrive, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led me here. It all seemed like a nightmare, a fog I couldn't see my way through. One minute, I thought my marriage was fine. The next, I was sitting in a coffee shop, waiting to hire a private investigator to dig into my wife's life. Greg arrived right on time. He was a tall guy in his late 40s, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, his eyes sharp and observant. He didn't waste time with small talk, just sat down across from me and asked, "So, what do you have for me?" I told him everything, the condom in the car, the suspicious bank charges, the business trips, and the way Megan had been acting lately. As I spoke, he listened quietly, taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he asked, "How long do you think this has been going on?" I shrugged, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I don't know. Maybe months?" I didn't even notice until I found. You know. Greg nodded. "Well, we'll need to start with the basics. I'll begin by tracking her movements, her phone, and any other interactions she has outside of what you already know. It's better to cover all angles. Is there anything specific you want me to look for?" "I just want to know the truth," I said, my voice heavy. "I need to know if she's cheating, who with, and how long it's been going on." Greg gave a small, understanding nod. "You'll have answers soon. I'll be in touch once I have something." We shook hands, and I left the coffee shop feeling both anxious and relieved. I had taken the first step toward finding the truth, but now all I could do was wait. The days dragged on, turning into weeks. Megan continued her routine as if nothing had changed, leaving for her business trips with the same confident smile, coming home with her usual stories about meetings and presentations. Every time she left, my stomach knotted with anxiety. Each kiss goodbye felt hollow, and every night she was gone, I lay awake, replaying the nightmare of possibilities in my head. But there was nothing I could do. Greg, the private investigator, told me it would take time. "These things don't happen overnight," he had said, reminding me to be patient. So I waited, and waited. More than a month went by. Megan traveled 3 times during that period, each time for work. And each time she left, I wondered if I was just a fool, waiting for Greg to confirm what I already knew deep down. I tried to keep up appearances, to act normal around her, but every time she walked through the door with that same cheerful energy, it took everything in me not to scream at her. My mind played cruel tricks, imagining her with someone else while I was at home, taking care of the kids and managing our life together. Then, after weeks of agonizing silence, Greg called. "We've got something. I've compiled all the evidence. We need to meet," he said, his tone even, but I could hear the weight behind it. This was it. Whatever Greg had discovered, it was going to change everything. We met at the same coffee shop, the one where I had first told him about my suspicions. It was a strange feeling walking in there again. The last time I had sat across from Greg, I still held on to some hope, some part of me that believed this was all just a misunderstanding. That hope was gone now. I didn't know what he was going to tell me, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Greg arrived on time, as always. He was carrying a thick manila folder, the edges stuffed with papers, photos, and evidence. He sat down across from me, his face neutral, but there was something in his eyes, something that made my chest tighten. "Bradley," he began, laying the folder on the table between us, "what I'm about to tell you, it's worse than we thought." I swallowed hard, bracing myself. "Just tell me," I said, my voice hoarse. Greg opened the folder and pulled out a stack of photographs, sliding them toward me. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. There was Megan, sitting at a candlelit dinner with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, her hand resting casually on his, her eyes locked with his in a way that made my blood boil. Another photo showed her walking into a hotel lobby with him, their bodies close as they moved through the doors. "That's the first man," Greg said, his voice calm and professional. "We'll call them man number 1. They've been meeting up at least once a month, usually during her business trips. He's from a nearby city, works as an architect." I stared at the photo, my hands trembling. It was one thing to suspect, but seeing it like this, evidence laid out in front of me, it hit like a punch to the gut. But Greg wasn't done. He pulled out another set of photos. "This is man number 2, he continued. "He's from a different city, farther away. He works in finance. She's been seeing him for about 6 months." In the photos, Megan was with a completely different man, at another restaurant, another hotel. The details were different, but the intimacy was the same. The way she touched him, the way they smiled at each other, it was as if she was living another life with him. And finally, there's man number 3. Greg slid the last set of photos across the table. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at the pictures. There she was again, my wife, with yet another man, this one younger, mid-30s, casually dressed. They were in a park, sitting on a bench, her head resting on his shoulder. I couldn't breathe. 3 men, 3 different lives, all happening behind my back. Greg closed the folder, giving me a moment to process it all. "Bradley, these men aren't connected to each other in any way. They don't know about each other, and none of them know about you. Megan's been pulling the wool over everyone's eyes." I sat there in stunned silence. It wasn't just one affair. It wasn't just one man. Megan was living a lie on a scale I hadn't even imagined. She was juggling 3 separate relationships, all while pretending to be the loving wife and mother at home. "She's been careful," Greg added, "but not careful enough. I've got everything you need to take the next step, whatever that may be. The next step. Divorce." I nodded, my mind spinning. "I'll take it from here," I said quietly. "Thank you, Greg." He nodded and left me there, sitting in that coffee shop with the folder full of evidence in front of me, my hands still shaking. My world had just shattered into 1,000 pieces, and all I could think about was what to do next. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. But there was no sense to be made. Megan wasn't just cheating, she was living some kind of twisted double life, maybe even a triple life. I'd heard of women like that, nymphomaniacs, addicted to the thrill of seduction, the power of control. But I never imagined that Megan, my wife, the woman I thought I knew, could be one of them. I wasn't dealing with a normal betrayal. This wasn't just some fling or a mistake. Megan had been systematically deceiving me, lying to my face while she carried on with 3 other men. And God knows how many more she would have found if I hadn't caught her. I had to get out. I had to protect myself and my kids. There was no way I could trust Megan anymore. She was dangerous, not just to me, but to our family. I didn't know what kind of person she really was, and I wasn't going to risk her destroying my children's lives the way she had destroyed mine. The next day, I met with a lawyer. I handed over everything Greg had collected, the photos, the reports, the timelines. I told him I wanted to file for divorce immediately and that I wanted full custody of the kids. I couldn't trust Megan with them, not after what I'd learned. She wasn't just a cheater. She was reckless, selfish, and completely untrustworthy. God knows what kind of life she was leading when I wasn't around. "I don't want her near my kids," I told the lawyer, my voice shaking with anger. "She's not fit to be a mother. Not after this." The lawyer nodded. "Given what you've shown me, you've got a strong case for full custody. We'll file the papers and start gathering more evidence if needed. But we'll have to move quickly." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a mix of rage and sadness. Rage at Megan for betraying me so completely, and sadness for the life we had once shared. It was all a lie now. Every moment, every memory, it was tainted. But I couldn't dwell on that. I had to focus on what was next. I had to make sure Megan didn't manipulate her way into keeping the kids, into ruining what was left of our family. I had always thought of Megan as a strong, independent woman. Now I saw her for what she truly was, someone who would use anyone, hurt anyone, to get what she wanted. A woman who couldn't be satisfied with just one life. Before you find out what happens next, then please subscribe to the channel. A few days after I met with the lawyer, the divorce papers were ready. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of my marriage, but a necessary one. The evidence was overwhelming. Megan had been lying to me for God knows how long, cheating with 3 different men, and there was no going back. I wanted to hand the papers over personally to see her face when she realized that the game was up. But little did I know, she had her own surprise waiting for me. That evening, I came home, ready to confront her once and for all. I walked through the door expecting the usual routine dinner, the kids, maybe Megan lost in her phone. But tonight was different. The lights were dim, and the dining room table was set with candles, wine, and a meal that smelled far too elaborate for a regular weeknight. Soft music played in the background. Megan stood in the kitchen, a smile on her face, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in a long time, one of those dresses she'd usually reserve for special occasions. "Hey, honey," she said sweetly, walking over and giving me a kiss. "I made something special for us tonight." I was immediately on edge. After everything I'd learned, this whole scene felt off, like some twisted last-ditch effort to save face. I was here to end things, to confront her with the divorce papers. But I held off, wanting to see what this was all about. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the romantic setup, my voice cautious. She smiled and took my hand, leading me to the table. "Sit down. I have a surprise." I sat, though my heart was already pounding with suspicion. Megan went to the counter and came back with something small, wrapped in a napkin. She set it down in front of me and smiled, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Go on, open it." I unwrapped the napkin slowly, my stomach sinking as I realized what it was. A pregnancy test. I stared at the 2 little pink lines, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. Pregnant. Megan was pregnant. I looked up at her, horror flooding through me. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? How?" I stammered. "We're having a baby," she said, beaming. "Isn't it amazing?" Amazing? No, this was a nightmare. Whose baby was this? It couldn't be mine. It couldn't be. My mind raced, flashing through everything I had learned in the last few weeks. 3 men. 3 different lovers. And now this? I felt bile rise in my throat as Megan leaned in, her hand resting on mine. "We're going to celebrate tonight, Bradley. This is the beginning of something new for us. A fresh start. Isn't it perfect?" I couldn't take it anymore. The rage, the betrayal, it all bubbled to the surface, and before I knew it, the words were spilling out of my mouth. "Perfect?" I said, my voice cold, sharp. "You think this is perfect?" Megan's smile faltered, confusion crossing her face. "Brad, what's wrong?" I pulled the divorce papers out of my bag and slammed them down on the table in front of her. "This is what's wrong," I growled. "I know, Megan. I know about everything. The lies, the cheating, the men." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I snapped, standing up. "The condom I found in your car, the bank charges, the hotels, the men. 3 of them, Megan. 3 men. Do you think I'm an idiot?" She stared at me in shock, her eyes wide. "Bradley, wait, you're misunderstanding." "No," I cut her off. "I'm not misunderstanding anything. I hired a private investigator. I've got proof. Pictures. Dates. Everything. You've been lying to me for months, maybe years, and now you're telling me you're pregnant." My voice broke with disgust. "Whose baby is it, Megan?" Her hands trembled as she reached for the pregnancy test, her voice shaking. "It's yours, Brad." "Of course it's yours." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen? You've been sleeping with other men, Megan. Don't stand there and pretend like this is some fairy tale where we're just going to start over." She stood up, her expression turning from shock to anger. "How dare you accuse me of that? I'm your wife. We've been married for 12 years, and do you think I'd betray you like that?" I don't think you did, Megan, I spat. I know you did. I've seen the photos, the receipts. You're caught. There's no way out of this. Her eyes narrowed, and her face twisted in frustration. Well, maybe you're not so innocent yourself. Ever think about that? Maybe I'm not the only one who's been unfaithful. My blood boiled. Are you serious right now? I growled, my fists clenching. I have never cheated on you. Not once. But you've been screwing around behind my back with multiple men. And now you're trying to turn this around on me? Megan glared at me, her hands clenched into fists. I didn't want it to be like this, she said, her voice rising. I didn't want to hurt you, but you've been so distant, so wrapped up in your work and I. Don't you dare blame this on me, I shot back. You did this. You destroyed our marriage. You're the one who made this mess, and now you're going to pay for it. Her eyes flickered with something dark, something desperate. And then, her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. If you file for divorce, she said, her voice trembling with venom, I'll kill myself. The room went silent. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Did she just? You heard me, she said, stepping closer, her eyes wild with a strange intensity. If you leave me, I'll end it all. I swear, Brad, I'll do it. You can't leave me. You can't take the kids from me. If you do, I'll make sure you regret it. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then, something inside me clicked. This wasn't love. This was manipulation, plain and simple. I had been so blind, so trusting, but now I saw her for who she really was. And if she thought this threat would scare me off, she was wrong. I looked her dead in the eye and gave a slow nod. All right, Megan. I won't file for divorce. Her eyes softened with relief, a triumphant smile creeping across her lips. I knew you'd come to your senses, she said, sitting down with a sigh. We can fix this. We just need to. But I wasn't listening anymore. As she rambled on about how we could move forward, I quietly reached into my pocket, turning off the voice recorder I had been running since I walked through the door. Every word she had just said, her threats, her manipulation, it was all on recorder. Now I had everything I needed. As I drove to my lawyer's office the next morning, I kept thinking about how to make sure Megan couldn't wriggle her way out of this. She was smart, too smart. If she got even the slightest inkling of what was coming, she'd pull every trick in the book to protect herself, and I couldn't afford to let her get ahead of me. No, we had to be precise, we had to move quickly and quietly. When I arrived at the office, my lawyer, Sam, was waiting for me. Sam was sharp, always one step ahead, which is why I trusted him to handle this mess. As I handed over the voice recorder, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He played the recording, listening intently as Megan's voice filled the room, first with her denials, then her accusations, and finally, the threat. I'll kill myself. Sam paused the recording, his brow furrowed. This is solid, he said, nodding thoughtfully. This gives us exactly what we need to show that Megan's a danger, not just to you, but to herself. But the challenge is how to proceed without tipping her off. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly. That's the problem. Last night, I told her I wouldn't file for divorce. She thinks I've backed down. If she finds out I've filed anyway, she could pull something drastic, or worse, manipulate the situation again. Sam nodded, deep in thought. You're right. If she knows you've gone back on your word, she'll try to use that against you or escalate her behavior. We can't give her that chance. We need to file the lawsuit and get the psychiatric evaluation ordered without her knowing, at least until it's too late for her to respond. But how? I asked. I already told her I wouldn't file. If she finds out too soon. A small, sharp smile crossed Sam's face as he began to sketch out a plan. We have to catch her off guard, he said, his voice low and measured. Here's what we do. First, we file the divorce papers and the motion for a psychiatric evaluation simultaneously. We'll do it quietly under the radar. Since you've already agreed not to file, we can use that to our advantage. I frowned, trying to follow. What do you mean? We file the paperwork without notifying her right away, Sam explained. Normally, she'd be served the divorce papers immediately, but I'll work with the court to delay that for a few days. In the meantime, we'll get an emergency hearing to request a psychiatric evaluation based on the recording. If the court agrees, the evaluation can be ordered without her knowledge, and once it's approved, she'll be taken into custody for the evaluation before she even realizes what's happening. I sat back, trying to process what he was saying. So, Megan won't know about the divorce or the evaluation until the court has already signed off on it. Exactly, Sam said. By the time she's notified, it'll be too late. The psychiatric evaluation will already be in motion, and she won't be able to manipulate the situation by making more threats or attempting to control the narrative. This way, we protect you and your children from her retaliating or spiraling further. It was a brilliant plan. Megan was smart, but Sam was smarter. This way, Megan wouldn't have time to react, wouldn't have time to manipulate the situation or make more threats. By the time she realized what was happening, the court would already be involved, and she'd be in no position to fight back. How quickly can we move on this? I asked, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. Sam glanced at his computer, checking some dates. We can file everything by the end of today, and I'll submit an urgent request for the psychiatric evaluation. The courts might take a day or two to approve, but I'll push for an emergency hearing based on Megan's suicide threat. With the recording as evidence, we should have no problem getting the judge to move fast. I nodded, my mind racing with the possibilities. If this worked, Megan wouldn't have a chance to manipulate me or the court again. The thought of finally having some control over the situation was almost overwhelming. Sam continued, his voice calm but determined. Once the judge signs off, we'll arrange for her to be taken in for the evaluation. You need to keep acting normal around her until then. Don't give her any reason to suspect what's coming. I can do that, I said, though the thought of going home and pretending everything was fine made my stomach churn. Sam stood up, signaling that our meeting was over. Just hold on a little longer. If all goes well, by this time next week, you'll have the psychiatric evaluation ordered, and we'll move forward with the divorce. Megan won't be able to fight this. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. I had to act like everything was fine, pretend like nothing had changed. Megan, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes, went about her routine as usual. She was overly sweet, overly affectionate, probably trying to make sure I hadn't changed my mind about the divorce. But all the while, the clock was ticking. Sam had filed the paperwork that same day, and the court had scheduled an emergency hearing. The judge had already agreed to fast-track the psychiatric evaluation based on Megan's recorded threats, and all I had to do was wait for the final approval. It came quicker than expected. 3 days after I met with Sam, I got the call. The judge had signed off on the psychiatric evaluation, and the court had issued an order for Megan to be taken into custody for a mandatory examination. The plan was in motion. I couldn't believe how smoothly it was going. Megan didn't suspect a thing. That evening, Megan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that her life was about to turn upside down. I watched her from the doorway, a strange mix of emotions swirling in my chest: anger, sadness, relief. I had once loved her more than anything, but now all I felt was pity. Pity for the woman who had destroyed our family with her lies, her deceit, her manipulation. She had dug her own grave, and now it was too late to crawl out of it. The next morning, the authorities arrived at our doorstep with the court order. Megan was stunned, confused, even when they handed her the documents explaining the psychiatric evaluation. She tried to protest, tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was solid, and the court's decision was final. I watched in silence as they took her away, her face pale with shock. She looked back at me, her eyes wide, searching for an explanation, for something to hold on to. But I didn't give her one. As the door closed behind her, I finally exhaled. The psychiatric evaluation came back within a week. Megan wasn't mentally ill, not in any clinical sense. The doctors confirmed what I had suspected all along. She was completely sane. She didn't have a psychological condition that drove her to lie, cheat, and manipulate. No, Megan had done all of this consciously, deliberately. She had made her choices with a clear mind, fully aware of the consequences. The truth was, Megan liked the control. She liked the idea of having it all, me as her reliable, devoted husband, the man who handled the responsibilities, provided stability, and took care of our family. And then, on the side, she indulged in her secret life with other men, using them to relieve her stress. The sheer audacity of it still made my blood boil. She had taken advantage of my trust, believing she could have the best of both worlds. It was disgusting. The court battle was grueling, but in the end, I won custody of our children. The evidence was undeniable: Megan's manipulation, her reckless behavior, and the recordings I had provided painted a clear picture of her lack of fitness to be the primary caregiver. But the victory wasn't complete. When it came to the division of property, things didn't go as I had hoped. Despite everything, the court ruled that Megan was entitled to a fair share of our assets, and I couldn't stop it. Still, that wasn't the worst of it. Throughout the entire ordeal, Megan clung to one fact, one desperate card she played over and over again: her pregnancy. She continued to insist that the baby she was carrying was mine, claiming that the child would bond us together and complicate the divorce. The court couldn't ignore it either, and until the baby was born, the final resolution of our case remained in limbo. Months passed. Megan carried the pregnancy to term, and finally, the day came when she gave birth. I wasn't there. I had no desire to be a part of that experience, but I insisted on a DNA test as soon as the child was born. The waiting was agonizing. There was a part of me, a small, terrified part, that wondered what I would do if the baby was mine. Could I handle it? Would I be tied to Megan forever because of this child? But when the results came in, it was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The baby wasn't mine. I should have felt relief, and I did, but it was a hollow kind of relief, tainted by everything else that had happened. This child was the product of Megan's affair, a reminder of how far she had gone to live her double life. But that wasn't the end. In the back of my mind, something had been gnawing at me for months. After everything Megan had done, after discovering how deep her betrayals went, I couldn't shake the doubt. Were our other children really mine? I couldn't help but question everything. The idea of Megan's lies extending beyond the past few years haunted me. So, after a long conversation with my lawyer and some difficult soul-searching, I requested DNA tests for my children. Those were the longest days of my life. But when the results finally arrived, I could breathe again. My children, our children, were mine. They had been all along. That small victory, in the midst of everything, was enough to give me hope that I could rebuild, that we could move forward. And so it ended. A bitter, twisted story that had started with something as simple as a used condom found in a car. What began as a suspicion turned into a nightmare of lies, infidelity, manipulation, and betrayal. Megan, the woman I once thought I knew, was exposed for what she truly was. The court granted me full custody, the DNA tests gave me peace of mind about my kids, and as for Megan, she's out there, somewhere, living with the consequences of the life she chose. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for sticking with me through this crazy ride, and I wish you all the best of luck. See you soon.